Today on Secure the Continent, our top country of focus on the continent today is Burkina Faso, where there's been increased violence linked to al-Qaida and ISIS, which has plagued the country for 7 years, killing 2,000 and displacing 2 million people. The attacks could threaten the junta's grip and power and reveal the government's inability to provide security. There are more details for you in this package.
In 2022, Burkina Faso experienced 2 military coups, and the problems have lasted for more than a decade. There are conflicts in the east and west of the country, with armed violence causing massive displacement. Unending violence and conflicts have caused Burkina Faso to suffer a crisis, with significant challenges faced in access to basic amenities.
Nous, on ne veut plus les aides. On veut qu'ils rentrent. On en a marre d'eux. On veut qu'ils rentrent. L'ambassadeur de la France, on veut qu'ils rentrent. Les ministères qui sont à Cambouessin, on veut qu'ils tous y rentrent. On va libérer le Burkina.
Nous sommes le Burkina Faso, c'est un pays indépendant. Le Burkina Faso, c'est un pays souverain. Nous avons décidé, nous voulons mener cette lutte-là. La guerre que nous menons présentement, le Burkina Faso a décidé de mener la lutte avec des bons partenaires. Et nous disons que la France n'est pas le partenaire idéal pour nous accompagner à la victoire finale.
D'ailleurs, le président lui-même a dit un jour que la France n'a pas d'intérêt, n'a pas d'amis, il n'a que des intérêts. Quand la France collabore avec un pays, ce n'est pas pour l'air, c'est pour leur intérêt.
Mais ça dit, et puis c'est l'ingrat. Quand tu vis dans un pays, le pays est en train de finir. C'est toi qui as les moyens pour l'aider, tu ne l'aides pas. Et tu dis qu'il faut rentrer.
More than 2 million people have been rendered homeless in the country, with the situation deteriorating in recent times. Burkina Faso's security problems have also led to political problems, with the government struggling to come into place after years of military presence. Schools remain closed, health facilities stay shut, and the country is in full chaos. Citizens have stayed positive amid the trouble, and despite the presence of foreign forces and new military friends from the international community, Burkina Faso is still struggling with itself and the never-ending gunshots. What is the way out? Will the government be able to provide security for the people? What is the way out? Will the government be able to provide security for the people?
Now, joining me tonight on Secure the Continent, I have Dr. Chris Kwaja, a security expert, is joining in from Abuja. I also have Moumouni TAMBOURA, a journalist, joining from the Burkina Faso capital, Ouagadougou, and also Dr. Lassane, Ouderaogo, research fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development, who joins us from Abuja in Nigeria. One welcome to you, gentlemen, and thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start with you, Dr. Ouderaogo. Can I start by asking you to give us a context and background to how we got here in the first place? Burkina Faso used to be spared the worst of the violence extremism in the Sahel. How did it go from being one of the most quiet countries in terms of security in the Sahel to the epicenter?
In one sitting, but what I will say is that up to 2011, 2012, Burkina Faso used to still continue to be one of these peaceful nations in a troubled region. But going on to 2014, 2015, we began to see the emergence of terrorist attacks, the first one being in 2015 in the capital city. And since then, the insecurity situation has only grown up and up and up to today. It has not gone down. And we could also link that to some of the major happenings that took place in the country. We have seen in 2014 the fall of Blaise Compaoré, which to some extent constituted a fall of our security grid as well, because Blaise Compaoré was a major player in the regional politics. He was involved in negotiating peace in Mali. He's been involved in negotiating peace between terrorist organizations and different states in the region, in helping free people who were kidnapped in the Sahel. So when Compaoré was kicked out of power in Burkina Faso, the special police unit or military unit that was working on intelligence and so on also fell apart. That is one way of looking at it. But another way of looking at it is that Burkina Faso, because of its strategic position in the Sahel as a key state sharing 5 borders, became a central target for the Islamic State in the Sahel, but also Jenim. Because if you are able to conquer or take off Burkina Faso, then it's easy to reach coastal Africa. I think Burkina Faso was for far too long an objective and a target in the hands of the terrorist organizations who are looking for a way to establish the caliphate. And with the fall of Libya as well, we have seen a lot of weapons infiltrate our zone. So quickly, given that the security situation was not strong, it was easy for jihadists to occupy these ungoverned spaces, especially the northern region, which we have to state it was not fully well governed. The tri-border regions, to be more specific.
Thank you, Dr. Ouderaogo, for giving us that background. Now, Moumouni in Ouagadougou, Dr. Ouderaogo has given us a background to this conflict. But today, as we see it, the Moutinho soldiers who ousted Burkina Faso's Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Damiba last year vowed that they will do a better job at stopping the jihadi violence rocking the country. 6 months later, we're witnessing a surge in the violence. The security situation even seems to be worse than what it was under the ousted president. Why is this so?
The deterioration of the security situation in Burkina Faso is extremely worrying. While the authorities are gradually losing their control over certain rural areas, jihadist types, insurgencies, and spreading into them. But I'm totally agree with Dr. Lassane Ouderaogo. And one thing that I want to precise is that most of people felt abandoned by different authorities since 2015. The first coup d'etat. And they were crying, they were asking to different authorities to come and take care of them. Many times they're yelling and asking them, aren't we Burkinabe? They're still asking. So for me, it's a mixed responsibility of the authorities to control different regions specifically in the north of region of Burkina Faso. So that is why most of people are easily hired by terrorist groups. You can remember last year when Damiba launched his operation called Reconciliation, National Reconciliation, to call people who want to drop down their arm to join the society. So that's the most reason we have different attacks in Burkina Faso.
Okay, you feel that was counterproductive. Now, let me bring in Dr. Kwaja from Abuja. Now, we've seen 2 coups in less than a year. They took out the civilian president, Chris Kwaja, because they said there was a spike in terrorism. And right now we can see that the problem is still there. Now, Dr. Kwaja, can you discuss the impact of the 2 coups last year on the security situation in Burkina Faso and how these may be affecting the government's ability to address the issue of violent extremism? Because Moumouni just said, you know, the former president Damiba's approach is one of the reasons why we've seen a spike in attacks.
Thank you very much. One of the key points we need to place on the table in looking at the way coups and counter coups have taken place in Burkina Faso is to ask the key question as to why coup, and coup d'etat responds to certain key undercurrents. And one is to the effect that when you look at discontent on the part of the people as to whether or not a particular regime is living up to expectations, you find coup becoming a readily available answer. The second is that within the government itself, when you have discontent in terms of how positions are shared, in terms of how the leader manages the different interests within that system, it makes coup to be an option for individuals or groups who feel not carried along or who feel they are not being given their own fair share of whatever they see as their national cake in terms of the distribution of power or resources. Now, over time, the history of coups have shown that these 2 points I raised have been the key definers of the successes or otherwise of coups. And in the context of Burkina Faso, we are seeing these two undercurrents playing out because the kind of public acceptance we see when this coup took place shows that the regime in power was not or might not have been living up to expectations. But within the context of the ECOWAS protocol on good governance and democracy, which underscores the point that the unconstitutional change of government, either through coups, mutinies, or any other attempt that is unconstitutional, is unacceptable. This makes the coup in Burkina Faso an unpopular coup, an illegitimate one for that matter, which key institutions like ECOWAS as well as the people of Burkina Faso should not accept. Because where you have coups and counter coups taking place with no strong resistance from within and outside the country, then you are bound to have series of coups taking place or series of insurrections or the emergence of rebel groups that will be fed by forces within or outside that country. And today what we see in Burkina Faso is that there are forces from both within and outside Burkina Faso that are supporting or trying to instigate some of the happenings we see in the country, and this requires both local and external support in terms of what the government of the people of Burkina Faso and all individuals and groups of goodwill that are committed to a stable and prosperous Burkina Faso.
Thank you, Dr. Kwaja. Now, Dr. Ouderaogo, recently there was a deadly attack in the northern part of Burkina Faso where over 50 soldiers of the Burkinabe army were killed. Can you provide an overview of the recent attacks in Burkina Faso?
It's very important to note here is that since the arrival of Captain Traoré at the head of the state, there has been new measures that have been taken in terms of recomposing and redeploying the military all over the country. We have not seen this before in terms of strategy, in terms of having our military deployed in all the region, the 13 regions of the country. So that being the case, and at the same time, he's also leaning toward using or deploying civilian volunteers. When he launched the recruitment for 50,000, 90,000 people responded to it. And so these 50,000 people are being trained. So right now, as he...
Hello, Dr. Ouderaogo, are you there? Okay, we seem to be having some audio connection with Dr. Ouderaogo. We'll get back to him soon. But I would like Moumouni to answer that question on the overview of the recent attacks. What happened in northern Burkina Faso, and why do we have such a high number of casualty, even though Dr. Ouderaogo spoke to the fact that, you know, there's a lot of rejigging and re-strategizing under the government of Captain Ibrahim Traore? Okay, I'll let you complete your thoughts, Dr. Ouderaogo. Moumouni will get back to you shortly. Sorry.
Yeah, so with this new deployment of military all over the country, the system is not fully set up yet. So, and for this particular incident that cost the lives of at least 51 gendarmes, the intelligence that we're getting is that they have been ambushed. They've been, you know, the jihadists have received information that, and these were actually two jihadist movements that were fighting. And when they have information that the military is on the move in the region, they actually coalesce to fight together, to join hands together to fight the military. And this is what happened basically, and costing the lives of at least 51 men on the ground.
Now, stay with you, Dr. Ouderaogo. Do you see a huge change in difference in approach and tactics from the government of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Damiba?
Well, when Damiba was in power, we have not seen a strong mobilization from the people. At the beginning, yes, we have not seen a mobilization from the people to support him from villages and so on. But now with Traore, this mobilization is effective. There's a lot of mobilizations that people are now saying that, no, we now know that this man is not here for just power. He's here because he wants to have an effective end of this war. So he's fighting, so we're going to support him. And we can see that in the ways the jihadists have turned to attacking civilians. Before Traore came to power, civilians did die, but as casualties, as collateral casualties. But now the jihadists are even targeting villagers, they are targeting people on the road, they are targeting civilians, and simply because the military is almost everywhere, the military is deployed everywhere. There's a significant number of places that the army couldn't reach, but now we have deployment of the army in those places. And that is very, very significant. Since 2020, we have not seen our army in even in the central, toward the central region of the country. And those are places that we have seen the military fight back and reconquer and place the flag. So, and of course, we don't see much of that in media reports, because reporting on those kind of issues would be like you are supporting the military. But at the end of the day, there's a strategy that is in place. There is a huge deployment of civilians who are being trained to defend their own villages and their own towns.
Okay, I guess we just have to wait and see the implementation and how this pans out for the people of Burkina Faso. Now, Moumouni, Dr. Ouderaogo just painted a very complex picture of the situation in Burkina Faso. And we have to admit that it's not conventional warfare, it's asymmetrical, that any military and intelligence organization will find difficult. I mean, you have people that are just hitting a soft target. So what is your assessment of the abilities of the forces of Burkina Faso? Do they have the capacity to deal with this jihadist extremism, or are they overwhelmed? And is there a gap that has been left by the departure of French special forces that used to be in Burkina Faso?
The assessment that I can do is that the regime of Traore is better than the former president, Damiba, because we getting back of certain region, like in south-west of Burkina Faso, we get back our region. So I can say that the assessment is good, but the only thing that it's keep worrying is that Damiba announced Traore and also Lassane, that only armed force will be on the ground, all of us. And the grouping of people that are living in different regions are not involved. So we needed to fight against terrorism. Only army can do it. But this is the strategy of Captain Ibrahim Traore, according to announcement that he did a week ago.
Hello, Moumouni, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, go ahead, please.
I said the only thing that is worrying now is not the people is not involved. People is not involved, and this is dangerous in the fight against terrorism. And the military intelligence is not enough. It's not enough. We have a conversation with a security authority that I wanted to keep his name here, and he said that Burkina Faso doesn't have enough forces to fight against terrorism. With their weapons, it won't be easy for us. So they need to involve people. And according to strategies announced by Ibrahim Traore a week ago, for me, I think it will be difficult for Burkina Faso to go through this terrorism situation.
So when you say, stay with you, Moumouni, when you say they need to involve people, do you mean militarily? Because Burkina Faso last Thursday announced an exceptional recruitment of 5,000 soldiers to serve the army at least for 5 years as part of the fight against violent extremism. Is this the type of recruitment or support you're asking for from the people?
Not only the recruitment, even the people in their own regions must be involved. Not only the volunteer for defense of homeland. No, I mean involvement as Boli did when during the Damibasa regime. They're talking about reconciliation because we need to go through two battles. A right to conquer people that they can trust MPSI too, and the second one, going through directly on the fighting against terrorism. But recruiting also people to 50 or 5,000 people to help fighting against it, that's not enough. It is what I mean.
Okay, thank you, Moumouni. Now, Dr. Kwaja, this fight has been going on for quite some time, and even the French in Mali could not deal with all their might and sophistication. They couldn't deal with the problems of violent extremism. So what role do groups like the Islamic State, al-Qaida linked JNIM play in the ongoing conflict in Burkina Faso? How have they evolved over time? And what drives them, and why are they still an effective fighting force after all these years?
The reality of the situation we face in Burkina Faso and the broader African continent is simply the fact that when violent extremist groups emerge, or insurgents or terrorists, depending on which one you are looking at, but they all have the same form in terms of their mutation and emergence. But wherever they exist, they are in constant battle with the state over winning the hearts and the minds of the people. The success of any of these groups is hinged on the extent to which they are able to win the support of the people. Terrorism thrives, or violent extremist groups thrive, where they have sufficient local support. It gives them room to hibernate, it gives them room to recruit, it gives them room to mobilize, it gives them room to propagate their messages. These messages can either be political, religious, economic, or they resort to forced recruitment of individuals or young men and women into their folds. And we've seen all this manifest in Burkina Faso and other countries, because the groups we are talking about are not entirely foreigners. They are made up of young men and women from Burkina Faso who support or agree to the ideology or the ideals or the vision propagated by these violent extremist groups. Now, the complexity here is that because they are able to win the hearts and minds of the people, it makes it difficult for the government of Burkina Faso or the government of France or whichever country that is coming in to fight these insurgent or violent extremist groups. And that is why, in order to deal with the pathways for addressing these problems, we really need to look at what the key drivers are. And just recently, the United Nations Development Program published two very important books, two editions. The first edition of that book looked at the drivers and incentives of violent extremist groups. The second book looked at pathways to recruitment and disengagement of these violent extremist groups. And I think for me, that is one very important document that needs to be examined. I was a country analyst for the UNDP here in Nigeria that looked at the emergence and flourishing of violent extremist groups in Nigeria. And the key issues we raised in that book is also what I see in Burkina Faso, where there is a religious content to it in terms of the kind of ideology that is being propagated and how that also resonates with the people. There is also an economic side to it, because when people don't have opportunities for social mobility in society due to widening inequality, due to unemployment, due to poverty, whatever incentives, whatever support they are getting, no matter how small, from a group, they tend to lean to that group. And these are all areas and mega trends of the evolution of violent extremist groups and how they are dominating the political systems of Burkina Faso and several countries within West Africa and the African continent that we need to really look into. And one point I need to make quickly is to go back to the argument of the African Union, which was propagated by the former South African president, President Thabo Mbeki, where he talked about African solutions to African problems, that Africa must take full responsibility for the preservation of peace and stability in the continent. And all Thabo Mbeki was saying is that we must look inwards in terms of, one, what are those key local issues that we have not dealt with that makes it possible for insecurity to rear its head? Second, we need to look at some of the transnational issues and how that also link to local happenings and dynamics within our society or continent or region or country, which makes it easy for violent extremist groups to move freely within the African borders. We talk about arms in Libya. The availability of arms itself is not a driver of insecurity, but it contributes to the sustenance of insecurity, because those who need these arms use it to perpetrate and perpetuate whatever idea that they have. And we have seen the connection between arms and violence, or arms and insecurity.
And Dr. Ouderaogo did address this point. It's a fine place to go on a break. You did mention African solutions to African problems. When we return from this break, we'll be looking at ways in which to end this violent extremist conflict in Burkina Faso. Do stay with us. This is Secure the Continent, News Central Television. We'll be right back after this break.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
Thank you for staying with us. If you're just joining, this is Secure the Continent, and we've been discussing the spike in violence in Burkina Faso. And we still have Dr. Chris Kwaja, security expert, who's joining from Abuja, Moumouni TAMBOURA, a journalist who's joining from Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, and Dr. Lassane, Ouderaogo, research fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development, who is live with us from Abuja. Now, Dr. Ouderaogo, before we went on the break, Dr. Kwaja was talking about, the local population, and maybe there's some connivance with this extremist jihadist groups, and also methods in which they used to recruit. Now, my question to you is, how are the local communities reacting to this violence? And also, as part of this, the authorities of the Bourg du Mohon in the northwest of Burkina Faso ordered the closure of 43 gold mining sites for security reasons as of Wednesday in this region plagued by jihadist violence. How does this contribute to the gold mines? How do they contribute to the violence? What's the role of the local communities? Do the jihadists enjoy any local support? And this closure, what means of livelihood will the artisanal miners resort to? Wouldn't that be grounds for them to, join these jihadist groups?
Well, it's important to agree once for all that the Burkinabe crisis is fundamentally the outgrowth of a domestic problem which found a contemporary channel, which is extremist violence, to manifest itself. So if you look at the systematic way different governments since 2015 have been unable to manage our ethnic diversity, especially that pertaining to the minority nomadic groups in the north, this has been very problematic, and it has created deep frustrations among local communities across Burkina Faso. So if you look at 2015, when we elected our first government, our first civilian president ever to be elected as president, for almost 2 years, they kept blaming the Compaoré regime for the terrorism. They have not taken it seriously and applied it and said, okay, this is a fundamental issue that we need to address. And when President Kabore fell in 2022, the new regime that came under the leadership of President Damiba thought that reconciling the different parties of Burkina Faso is the answer to the terrorist crisis. And he failed because it was clearly demonstrated that people were not interested in that. Bringing back Blaise Compaoré, trying to talk about reconciliation, that is not going to resolve this problem of insecurity. And when President Traoré came, his answer has been primarily military. And he's the only one who is also talking about actually bringing development to those areas, especially the northern region. And to go back to your question about the closure of the artisanal gold mines, this is very, very key, because those mines, they harbor a lot of people that could easily be recruited into to these terrorist organizations. But at the same time, they are also victims, because most of the people who are working there, they cannot even go out and sell the gold to official places where gold is bought. So what kind of evidence do we have that they are not actually helping, contributing to finance jihadism? We don't have that. So the idea of closing the artisanal gold mines is first to protect them, because definitely those zones are not safe anymore. And of recently, civilians have become the prime targets of whether it's JNIM or whether it's the al-Qaida organizations and the different factions. So you see that while this thing is going on, while this fundamentalism is going on, the local population are hard hit when it comes to the economic hardship. The price of goods have tripled between 2015 to 2022. The price of staple goods like corn, rice have almost tripled. So people are unable to afford food. And in so many places, most of the people who go to artisanal gold minings are people who are farmers. Now they cannot farm because they have been driven out of their farms. And those who are going to those farms are those who do not want to just run to the capital cities to swell the numbers of internally displaced people. So the problem is very fundamental here. And we have to acknowledge, we have to accept that this is fundamentally a local problem. And it's the military is not the only solution, but it's the beginning of the answer to this crisis. Unless we fight and push them back and we begin to bring development solutions to the people who are already engulfed in this crisis, you cannot bring development to those places unless the crisis is over, unless the jihadis have been pushed out. So it's complex, it's very complex, and the only folks who can actually drive them out at this precise moment is perhaps the military, but also the civilians who are supporting them, because the civilians tend to actually know the ground, the terrain.
Local intelligence also.
Yeah, and then intelligence, which is extremely, extremely key. And the cooperation of the local folks is very, very fundamental in building reliable intelligence that will help push them out. Because those people who are creating havoc are not necessarily outsiders. These are Burkinabe. These are folks like me and you. Those are Burkinabe folks. Those are our brothers and sisters from Burkina. So what has led to them taking weapons to fight against their own country? That is a question that still needs to be addressed, as one of my colleagues was alluding here. It's really, really fundamental that we address it, but we cannot be fighting them and addressing it at the same time without proper intelligence, without proper security, when civilians are targeted.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ouderaogo. Now, Moumouni, according to a recent UN report, almost 1 in every 4 people in Burkina Faso, a country of 20 million people, need urgent humanitarian response. What are some of the humanitarian effects of this conflict on the people of Burkina Faso? And also, what impact have these attacks had on the civilian population in Burkina Faso, particularly those living in areas affected by violent extremism?
So is recording over millions of people, and that is concerning displaced person. And the humanitarian action that they need is only about food, health, and education. And this impact of civilians in Burkina Faso is that now we can count, according to a recent communique, we have the centers taking place taking care of this displaced person is growing up always and everywhere in the country of Burkina Faso. And in this effort, a push up to government to call for effect of war. So that's why you can remember 2 weeks ago, the government decided to increase the price of certain products like beers, smoke, and so on. Let's mention that. And to cut 200 CFA or more than that to support the war. And these affect all our preparation. Last time, we take part of a conference where people were telling that it is hard and rude for them to have. It's not enough. And they have to move every day to look for the money. And according to this decision of government, it is really hard. So this was to show how much the impact of the lack of humanitarian assistance can be touched the civilian of Burkina Faso.
Thank you, Moumouni. Now, quickly, Dr. Kwaja, as we end our discussion, what are the long-term prospects for peace and stability in Burkina Faso, and what steps need to be taken to achieve lasting security in the country?
The most important pathway for now and in the long term is for the government of Burkina Faso to invest heavily in winning the hearts and minds of the people of Burkina Faso. Because where government is not able to do that, it creates a huge lacuna that violent extremist groups are able to fill. The second is that the management of diversity should be a central focus of the government of Burkina Faso, where inclusion is not taken as a key priority by government. It makes it easy for those who feel excluded or marginalized from government and governance to resort to all manner of approaches or ways in passing messages of discontent and disgruntlement to the government. Insurrection becomes one of the key manifestations of such discontent, and that is why a situation where the government of Burkina Faso is able to sit down to look at how within the framework of governance it is able to bring in all key voices to define a pathway for inclusive governance. That for me is a very key area to focus on. The third area is that what we see in Burkina Faso has both a local and transnational content, which makes it important for the government of Burkina Faso to close ranks with neighboring countries like Mali and other countries within the Sahel that are also experiencing the situation we are confronted with because of the ease with which weapons, people, and drugs move freely within these borders. The porosity of these borders makes it easy for people and weapons to move. And that is why recruitment becomes very easy. You have instances where people are moved from one country to the other to go and fight or offer their services for either economic or even ideological gains. ECOWAS have a very strategic role to play in also supporting the government of Burkina Faso and other countries within the sub-region that are having this problem. Today you have France leaving Burkina Faso. I don't think the involvement of the Wagner group in Burkina Faso will be the way out. The government of Burkina Faso and governments of West African countries must appreciate the negative consequences and impact that the involvement of private military and security companies or mercenaries might have in their security. And that is why it is important for us to take a second look at the way ECOMOG was used in Sierra Leone and Liberia and begin to look at the prospects of what an ECOWAS standby force can do in supporting the efforts of the government of Burkina Faso in dealing with the situation we are confronted with right now. And this will also require the support of the African Union and the United Nations.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Kwaja. I'd like to say thanks to our guest, Dr. Chris Kwaja, security expert who joined in from Abuja, Moumouni TAMBOURA, journalist joined in from Ouagadougou, and Dr. Lassane Ouderaogo, who joined us live from Abuja. I do appreciate your insights and contribution to the program. Thank you.
Thank you.